My name is Kalani Raposa. My mother is Lakota from the Pine Ridge Reservation, from the Jumping Bull family. My father is Native Hawaiian from Oahu, from the Pu'uli family. I'm here today to share with you a little bit about my story, my background, in hopes that it'll help some of you out there. I was born and raised on the Pine Ridge Reservation. Grew up during the 70s during the FBI AIM wars. So as a child, I saw a lot of the violence, saw a lot of the discrimination, a lot of the racism. And I think people forget about what happened during that period. It was a period of turmoil that wasn't broadcast on the news. It was a really quiet war. But it was about the Indians trying to gain back who they were, gain back their land, fight for their rights, their spiritual rights, because a lot of our religion was still outlawed then. The Sundance is still outlawed on the books, even though we participate in it. So the American Indian movement formed to fight for the people, and they were met with opposition, not just by the government, but by other Indians. And so some of the things I saw growing up was armored personnel carriers drive across the reservation with 50 caliber machine guns mounted to the top. And so sometimes when people talk about, drive-by shootings in LA or Santa Rosa, and I kind of laugh to myself because you haven't really experienced a drive-by shooting until an armored personnel carrier has gone across your front yard. I was there during the manhunt for Leonard Peltier. I was there during the trials for Dennis Banks, Russell Means, John Trudell. And after Leonard was captured and sent to prison for 2 life sentences, everything just kind of died out on the reservation, went back to life the way it was. Well, the Pine Ridge Reservation is one of the most decimated reservations in the country. We have one of the highest rates of substance abuse, alcohol abuse, child neglect, domestic violence. The average median age for an adult male Lakota on the Pine Ridge Reservation is 40 years old. The average median income is about $2,000 a year. So I grew up in abject poverty. And when I was probably about 7 or 8 years old, my father moved us from the reservation out to the San Francisco Bay Area. And when I came out to the Bay Area, it was immediately apparent that I didn't fit. I didn't fit in. I was living in a white, suburban, middle-class neighborhood. And people would look at me, they see my skin color, they see the length of my hair. And, I was treated differently. And as a result, I started building these resentments, and I started building these walls. And the higher and thicker these walls became, the more distance I put between me and basically a white nation. Because when you grow up on the reservation, that's all you know. You know Indian life, you know Indian people, you know Indian culture, you know Indian tradition. There were no white people running around on a reservation, and now I'm immersed in a world full of white people. There was a new culture I had to learn. And I think oftentimes when people think about Native Americans, they think about Native Americans back in the 1800s, and somehow they think we died out or that we're extinct, but we're still here. Most of us stay on the reservation because it's a challenge to live off the res. So many people don't understand our culture. They don't understand who we are as a people, as a spiritual people. They don't understand the problems that we deal with on a daily basis, especially when you're off the res. So as a result of those things, I started drinking at an early age. I had my first drink at about 7 years old, my first drug at 11. By 12 or 13 years old, was using meth, using cocaine, using heroin, and I became incorrigible to the point that my family didn't want me in the house anymore. And so when I ended up getting arrested and going to juvenile hall at about 13, they went ahead and let the state make me a ward of the court. Now, as a ward of the court could place me wherever they liked, any group home, any facility, any institution. And because by that time the crimes I was committing weren't so severe, they took a chance and started placing me in different group homes around the Bay Area. And each new group home was like a new world for me. And it's like starting over again with a whole new group of people that stared at me like I was a scientific curiosity. And at that point, it seemed like the best idea was to just numb myself from all of it. And so I do a lot of drinking, a lot more drugging, and I do a lot of running away from these group homes. And each time I ran away, I'm just a kid, so I can't really support myself. I can't stay on the run. I mean, who's going to hire a 14-year-old kid? And so I ended up going back to juvenile hall, and then another group home, a juvenile hall, and a group home. And it got to the point where I got so comfortable being in juvenile hall that as soon as they placed me in a group home, I'd run away and I'd go straight to juvenile hall. I figured I'd save them a trip. So when I was about 16 years old, they placed me in a group home out in Tiburon, out in Marin County. And it's one of the wealthiest counties in the United States. It was back then anyway. I think Napa and San Francisco has caught up with it. But in Marin County, there were things that I was familiar with. There were lots of trees there. There was mountains there. There was a lot of wooded areas where I could go and walk and feel like an Indian again. But I still had this white world to contend with. I was going to a white high school with pretty well-to-do kids. And I remember skipping most of my classes, but I got involved in the poetry class. And I stayed with it. You know, I enjoyed words. I enjoyed the English language and working with it. And when I was in this class, I met this girl. And we started seeing one another. And something was happening there. Something was blossoming between us. And I remember one evening, she and I got in an argument over something that I can't even remember. It was probably so insignificant. But she ended up going over to San Francisco across the bay to stay with some friends to kind of sort this argument out. And I expected her to come back Sunday night, and she didn't come back Sunday night. And so Monday morning, on my way to school, there was a newspaper stand, and the headline read, "Marin Girl Slain." And it was one of those moments where there's just a knowing, or I knew it had something to do with her, even though I didn't know. My morbid curiosity got the best of me. I popped a quarter in the slot and I pulled the paper out and found out that she had been killed in a random murder in Golden Gate Park. And I remember just going numb. I didn't cry, I didn't get angry, I didn't feel anything. And I set the paper back on the rack. And from that point forward, the rest of my life is somewhat of a blur. A lot of drinking, a lot of drugging, in and out of jail, in and out of jobs, in and out of relationships that I used as Band-Aids to try and patch up this wound that I was bleeding from. And it didn't seem like anything was gonna fix that. And because I couldn't hold down a job, I started relying on burglaries to support myself. And I became pretty good at being a burglar. And so I made this a career move of sorts. And I spent about 20, 25 years just ripping and running and getting loaded and robbing houses. And it all caught up to me in about 2003. I was living in a residential hotel above this little Chinese restaurant in San Rafael. And I had this feeling I was being watched. And people were telling me, "Oh, you're just paranoid." And I would tell them, just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean that I'm not being watched. And so I'd creep around, sneaking in and out, knowing that whoever they were out there. And I couldn't take it anymore. And I knew my cases were stacking up against me. It was only a matter of time before they caught up to me. And the way I saw it, when they caught me, it was only a matter of time. I was going to end up doing life. And I figured if I have to do life and if I have to die somewhere, I'm going to do it on my terms and my conditions, not on theirs. I didn't want to die in a prison cell somewhere. So I went out to the Tenderloin District in San Francisco, and I bought as much crack and heroin and whatever else I could find with the intent to just take myself out of the game. And armed with all these drugs, I went back to my little residential hotel. And I went down to the bathroom at the end of the hallway and proceeded to get busy on dying. And I died a junkie's death. I died in a rundown residential hotel in the bathroom. From what my understanding is, someone saw me laying there. They dialed 911. The paramedics came and they revived me. On the way to the hospital, I flatlined again, so they revived me one more time. When I got to the hospital, they were able to stabilize me. And I was in the ICU for about a week. And when I woke up to all these tubes running in and out of me. And my ankle handcuffed to the bed rail. And I remember looking around and thinking, damn. At that point, you think anyone would be grateful to have their life saved, but I wasn't. I was pissed off that these people had actually saved my life because I had done for the state what they were going to do anyway. They were going to have me die in some place where I couldn't hurt anybody, where I couldn't do any more damage. And now I was alive to face the charges. And I was mad. I was angry. And I remember after I came to, the doctor came and did a basic physical and checked on me and let me know that there were some police officers outside waiting to talk to me. And when he left, the San Rafael PD came in. They read me my rights. And they were arresting me for 31 burglary charges. And a couple of days later, when I was well enough to be discharged, they booked me into the Marin County Jail. And because the suicide attempt was so sincere, they put me in the psych unit in a locked cell with nothing but a camera above me. No clothes, no possessions, no belongings, just this long bulletproof vest-like thing. They called it a smock. And it velcroed on either side. I was naked underneath. I had no bed to sleep on. There was a slab of concrete that came out of the wall down to the floor. That's where I slept, and the light stayed on in that room 24 hours a day. The only human contact I had was when the food slot would open, and there'd be a pair of hands in blue rubber gloves that would hand me food through there. And then I would take the food and I would eat, and about 15 minutes later, I'd see those hands come through the slot again so I could pass my tray through. This went on for what I figured to be about 10 days. And during those 10 days, I wasn't permitted to bathe. I wasn't permitted to brush my teeth. I didn't have anything to comb my hair with. Was feeling pretty bad about myself. Smelling pretty bad. I just wanted to get cleaned up. And when you're living in those conditions, it gets pretty hopeless. And I just wish that they wouldn't have they wouldn't have brought me back. And in the middle of all this, I remember something a good friend of mine told me, and she said, when your life has gotten as bad as it can possibly get, make a gratitude list. And I remember thinking about that and just laughing. I was looking around this little cell and this camera up above me, a slab of concrete and this smock I'm wearing. And I'm thinking, what the hell do I have to be grateful for? And then I sat there for a minute and I thought about it, and I realized that, despite my efforts, I was glad to be alive. That even though I was definitely going to go to prison for the rest of my life, a lot of the things that I wanted to do in my life were still achievable from a prison cell. I could still write books. I could maybe reach out and help people change their lives. I could still play music. I could still create songs. I could still go to college. I could still get my degree. And the more I thought about these things, the more grateful I became. And at the end of this process, the next time I saw the blue hands, I asked the hands if I could see the psychiatrist. And a couple days later, the unit psychiatrist came over, and we spoke through the food slot. I was leaning down, looking at him. He was looking at me. And I said, I understand that you have a drug and alcohol pre-treatment unit in this jail. And he said, we do. And I said, well, I'd like to go there. And he said, well, you can't go there until we get you off the suicide watch. So how are you feeling? And I said, I'm good. I said, I'm good. I'm happy to be alive. But if I go to prison, I want to go there in a better state of mind. So he said, go ahead and write a letter to the director of the drug and alcohol unit. He'll come over and talk to you. And so I wrote him a letter, and he came over that afternoon. And they opened the door, and I sat down at a table with him, and I said, I want to move over to your unit. And he said, there's nothing I can do for you. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, I know who you are. I know why you're here. Your story was all over the front page of the paper. He said, everybody that goes to the pre-treatment unit generally ends up going to a placement somewhere in a residential treatment program. He said, but you're not going to go there, so it would be a waste of my time to even put you in the program. You're taking up a seat from somebody else that could use it. And I told him I could really use it. I said, I know I'm going to prison. I know I'm going to go do at least one life sentence, maybe two. But when I go there, I want to go there spiritually centered. I want to go there with a mindset that my life can still go on even from a prison cell, and I don't know how to do those things. I need help learning them. And if you could help me do that before I go to prison, maybe I could do something positive while I'm in prison. And he thought about it and agreed to bring me over to the unit. In the midst of this, transferring over to the unit and starting to do this pre-treatment program, I was dealing with my court cases. And I remember having a meeting with my attorney and asking, how bad is it? And he said, it's so bad that they're not talking about whether you're going to do a life sentence. They're talking about how many life sentences you're going to do. There's a pool at my office, and most of them are betting 4 to 5. I said, what do you think? He said, I think we got a challenge ahead of us. What he had told me was a DA had taken, of those 31 cases, the 5 cases he knew were a slam dunk that he would get a conviction on, because he had witnesses, he had my fences, he had drug dealers, he had people coming up that were willing to testify against me. And with that kind of case, there's no getting out from underneath it. And so I'm going back and forth to court, and I'm doing the drug treatment. And at one point I went to court, and my lawyer said, well, the DA has a deal for you. And I said, let's hear it. And he said, he's offering, you plead to 1 count, he'll give you 25 to life, he'll drop the other charges. If you don't take the deal, he's going to try you on all 5, and you're going to end up doing 5 consecutive life sentences. The sad thing is, my life was in such bad shape, and I had made such a huge mess of it, that I had to actually consider taking a life sentence as a plea bargain. So I'm sitting in the holding tank, pacing back and forth, wondering what the right thing to do is. I did some basic arithmetic in my head, and what I figured was, if I take this deal, in 25 years, I'll be in my mid to late 60s. And there's not enough life left for me to do a lot. But if I was granted parole, I'd still be able to walk on a beach. I'd still be able to run through the woods. I'd still be able to go sweat. I'd still be able to do some things with my family, my people. And that's a better way to leave this planet, doing those things. So I told my lawyer, let's go ahead and take the deal. And so when we went into court, I had a seat, and my lawyer told the judge that he'd like to approach the bench and have the DA come along with him. And the judge asked, have you reached a deal? And my lawyer looked at the DA and shook his head, yeah, said, well, we have a deal. And so they approached the bench, and I imagine they were discussing the terms and conditions of this deal. And for reasons that I can't explain, I stood up and told my lawyer, no, I'm not going to take the deal. And I remember pointing at the DA saying, if you want to take my life away from me, you're going to have to work for it. And after that fell out of my mouth, I realized that was probably the stupidest thing I've ever said in my life, because the DA was ready for a fight. And I don't think I was. So when I went back to the jail, the main jail, my lawyer came over and he visited me, and he said, so how do you want to do this? And I said, I don't have a clue. And he said, well, finish the program. I'm going to keep putting in continuances. Do the program. Get a good head on your shoulders, get things pretty clear in your mind so you can face this thing, because you got a fight ahead of you. And he was right. So I put all my energy into the program. And 6 months later, I graduated from it, and I became the assistant facilitator. A few months after that, I became the inmate facilitator. And I was starting to run groups. I was starting to help write treatment plans for the other inmates. I was doing the lectures in the afternoon and trying to be a positive role model and support for these other guys that I knew were going out to other programs. I knew I was never going to be able to go to one. But I figured if I could do something in some small way to help someone passing through here get to a program and get their life together, and then doing those life sentences wouldn't seem so bad. There'd be some meaning behind it. I guess the impact I had on someone or some people that passed through there was big enough that a reporter from the Marin Independent Journal came out to talk to me, to talk about the work I was doing, talk about the cases I was facing. And she was curious. She was curious as to why. If I knew I was going to do life, why would I even bother doing all of this? And I told her that whether I'm in prison or whether I'm out of prison, every minute in my life counts. And I want to do productive things with it, because I've spent most of my life destroying my life and other people's. And I didn't want to do that anymore. And somehow I wanted to balance those scales out, because at that point I was operating in a huge deficit. And so she ran this story in the Sunday paper on the front cover. And I remember reading it and was just really moved by the story. And apparently other people that read it were moved by it too. Because we went in to fight these cases. And what my lawyer suggests is we just plead guilty to all 5 of them. And I remember looking at him and saying, Mark, are you out of your mind? And he said, no, there's a method to my madness. He said, once you plead guilty, the DA has nothing more to do with the case. He said, now it's between you and the judge. And what we need to do is humanize you to the judge, so that maybe he'll He'll strike your prior strikes. He'll give you a suspended prison. And maybe if there's a tear in the fabric of reality and the planets and the stars align, maybe you can get a program out of this after you do some county time. He said, I'm not hopeful, but maybe. And so we went to work on my defense, going through my entire history. And I remember him hiring for forensic psychologists and counselors and people in the treatment field that were willing to come and testify. And so on sentencing day, I was in the holding tank, and my lawyer told me I have a surprise for you. Couldn't for the life of me figure out what that was. So when I came to the courtroom, I was shocked and surprised. The courtroom was packed. It was packed with a lot of faces of people that I didn't know, that I'd never met in my life. At that point, I didn't have any friends left. I had no family that was willing to talk to me. I remember at one point my father came down to jail to visit me just to tell me, congratulations, you finally become something this world can do without, and left. And so I asked Mark, who are these people? And he said, well, these people are here to testify on your behalf. And I said, what? And he said, they read your story in the paper. And even though they think that you should be breaking into houses and stealing things, they don't think you should be doing life sentences either. And they're here to help. And I looked over and looking at these people, and they were looking at me. And I remember the tears started coming in my eyes because I never had anybody go to bat for me, especially strangers. And I looked over, and there was a camera crew there, and they were filming because they had permission from the judge to film. So my lawyer presented my case, and the DA argued his best he could, and it was up to the judge to make the decision. Well, the judge that was sitting there that night was not the regular judge that was in that courtroom. He was a visiting judge from LA and handled mostly murder cases. The judge that was originally set to hear the case retired, took an early medical retirement. So this judge was just filling in until they could make a new appointment. Because this judge came from LA where there's so much violence, property crimes with him rank about here because he deals with so many murders and rapes and violent charges that are up here. So even though the burglaries were serious by his legal value system, they were nothing compared to what he was used to dealing with for the past 20 years. And so when he sentenced me, he decided to strike all my prior strikes. And he gave me a 21-year suspended sentence. Gave me 2 years of county time and ordered me to a treatment facility. And it was more than I could ever hope for. And I remember when he pronounced the sentence, I was numb and shocked. I was in disbelief because I didn't think anything like that was possible. As it turns out, that's the largest suspended sentence that was ever given out of the Bay Area. And there was a lot of controversy over it, a lot of controversy with the judge. And so it seemed like things were going well for me and that I was going to get my life back. Until my lawyer reminded me that I had to go up to Sonoma County and account for 3 more burglaries. And that was, I was looking at 86 years of triple life on that one. So I just got out from underneath cases that carried 137 years to quintuple life. Now I'm looking at 86 years to triple life. And I thought, man, I don't know if I can do this fight again. And my lawyer said, you'll do fine. We've laid the groundwork in this county. We'll just get your lawyer up there to follow suit. And I'm pretty sure that the judges up there will follow suit because if anything happens, it'll fall on the Marin County judges. It'll be their responsibility to take the heat. And so I went up there and we fought the cases the same way we fought the cases in Marin County. And my lawyer was right. What they ended up giving me was a 16-year suspended prison term plus 5 years for another prior. So it ended up being 21 years again. And I did my county years and I went over to Walden House and I went through treatment. And I graduated from Walden House. And I was so happy to complete this program and start getting my life back that I went out and celebrated and got loaded. And when I got loaded, they violated me. And when they violated me, they sent me to prison for those 21 years. Now, because my prior strikes were stricken, I was only required to do about 10 years. And when I got to prison for the first couple of years, it was touch and go. I didn't want to be there. I was angry that I was there. And I had no one left to blame but myself. I didn't want to blame myself, though, so I kept putting it back on the probation officer that violated me for this. And I was getting in a lot of fights. I was spending a lot of time in the hole. And I remember some of the Indian brothers on the yard coming up to me after I got out of the hole, and they let me know, bro, you got to something, man, because you can't be on this yard with us if you're going to keep doing the things you're doing. And I said, well, I don't know how to fix whatever you think it is I need to fix. And they said, do you sweat? And I said, yeah, I sweat. said, how come you never come around the lodge? I said, I got no business in the lodge. I haven't walked that path since when I was a kid. They said, well, come back to the drum, come back to the Red Road. You know, it helped us, it can help you. I thought about it. And so I went back out there, and I didn't want to sweat. But I started running with the Indian brothers, hanging out with them. I started tending fire, started participating more in the ceremony, more in the capacity of helping. And about 7 or 8 months into it, I decided it was time, so I went in the lodge and I cleaned up. And in the sweat lodge, it's dark and nobody can see you cry. And I remember just crying all this stuff out of me. You know, all the hurt, all the anger, everything that led up to me going to prison, because I kept it all bottled up inside. Stuff from when I was a kid, you know, going back to my parents not wanting me in the house anymore, to being bounced around all these different worlds. And I finally got all that stuff out of me. And when I did, and I crawled out of that lodge, being born again, it's like crawling out of a womb. It's the point of the EP ceremony, sweat lodge ceremony. And from that point forward, I decided to do the positive things that I told the judge that I was going to do. It would give me my life back. So I went back to school, became a drug and alcohol counselor. I got my certificate and certification as a drug and alcohol treatment specialist. After that, I went to work in the education department in prison. I was tutoring people for the GED. And so my life was moving forward. And midterm through my prison sentence, my lawyer, my original lawyer from the Marin County case, came to visit me, and he said, I got a project for you. And I asked him, okay, let's hear it. And he said, I want you to write a book for me. I said, I can't write a book. And he said, I saw that 30-page letter you wrote to probation about why they shouldn't take your life away from you. I think you can write. So I started co-authoring this book with my lawyer, and it kept me out of my head. I stayed involved in the sweat lodge ceremony, stayed active with the GED program. And before I knew it, my 10 years was up. And I paroled out to Bakersfield, and they put me down at the train station. And it was just an odd sensation after being locked up for so long. The problem is things go fast. At those 10 years, the world I left didn't exist anymore, and I felt like Fred Flintstone in an episode of The Jetsons. See, when I went to prison, cigarettes were still $1.95 a pack. Gas was still under $2 a gallon. Milk was $1.75 a gallon. You know, laptops were about this thick and weighed a metric ton. Cell phones would flip out and they were about this big. And I come to this world filled with technology, and I remember being on the train and everybody being plugged into something, some electronic device, and I remember feeling out of place. I got back to the Bay Area. I checked in with Parole. And I spent about 3 weeks homeless, sleeping next to railroad tracks. And I decided, you know what, I don't want to live like this. And I had a wife and I had a daughter over in Napa, and I decided to get back to work and get off the streets as quickly as I could. So I went back to work. I brought my family over from Napa. We're living in Santa Rosa. And for the next couple of years, you know, I was doing everything that I could do to keep myself clean, to keep myself sober, and to be a good father, a good husband. But I lived most of those years in isolation. I wasn't going to a lot of meetings. And I just thought staying at home with my daughter would keep me clean. And it did for a long time. And then me and my wife started getting further and further apart. And I eventually ended up using, and the day after I used, my parole agent came over and dropped a bottle on me. And of course, it was dirty. And he asked me, you know, why are you dirty? Where have you been? What have you been doing? And I said, you know, actually, I was at a book release party last night, and we were celebrating the publication of my book. You know, I drank a little, I did a few lines, and I don't think it's anything for you to be concerned about. Well, this parole agent was very concerned about it, and insisted that I go to treatment for 90 days for having it. And he said, you know, you can go to treatment or you can go to jail. And so I was actually considering my options, because jail didn't seem so bad at that point. I know how to do jail, do treatment again. I want to do treatment and tell people that I've been clean and sober all through my prison term. I get out, I'm sober for 2 more years. I got about 11, 12 years, and then went to a party one night and threw it all away. I didn't want to deal with that in treatment. But then my wife reminded me of something. Every time I go to jail, I catch more time. And it's just one of those things. And jail is it's that kind of world where you stand up for yourself and you don't let anyone disrespect you. And oftentimes that includes catching more time. So she suggested I go to the program. So they sent me out to Napa, to the McAllister Institute. And I remember getting out there, and I was the only native in the program, a program full of white people. And I'm thinking, here we go again. And so my plan was to ask these people for everything that they couldn't possibly give me, so they would have to find another program for me. So I told them that in order for me to do a full recovery, I need to be tied into my culture and to my spiritual practices. So I need to have access to a talking circle and a drumming circle and access to a sweat lodge at least once a month. And I was intending on them saying, you know what, no, you're here to do treatment and you can take care of that stuff when you're done with treatment. But to my surprise, they said, you know what, if that's what you need, we can make that happen. You just let us know when, where, and how. I remember thinking to myself, geez, well, I've run out of things to throw at them, so now I've got to come up with places to do these. Now, I was doing a lot of drumming and singing and therapy in Santa Rosa. It wasn't feasible for me to get out there in the evenings, commuting back and forth. There was no one to take me. There was no bus service that ran out there. So I remember talking to Mark Owens out at Tribal TANF, asking him what's available here in Napa. He said, there's a little place out there called the Suscol Intertribal Council. There's a woman there named Charlie Toledo. Give her a call. He gave me her number, and I gave her a call and asked her, you know, what exactly do you do here? And she ran down some of the programs for me. She said, we have a talking circle here on Wednesday night. Sal Garcia is a facilitator. He's been doing this for a while. We have a drumming circle in the evenings and Thursday. I said, Mitch Wagner, she's a Lakota woman. She's your people. You know, she teaches that. And we have other things to offer, sewing classes. And I said, well, you mind if I come down and check it out? And she said, no, not at all. And I remember that feeling I get whenever I go to meet new Indians. So we're very standoffish in the beginning. You know, put that stoic face on. We just kind of size people up and sit off in the background, be quiet. And I remember coming in here with that skepticism, and I didn't want to start off on a bad note, so I brought my counselor with me. We sat in this talking circle. And I introduced myself. Sal introduced himself. One of his cousins was here as well. And I kind of explained to them, you know, what I was going through, what was going on. And I remember feeling at home for the first time in a long time. And it was this room. And it was nothing fancy going on. It's just people sitting around talking like we used to when I was little. And when I walked out of there, I remember I was feeling sad that it was over so quickly. Sal told me to come back next week. And so I made a commitment to come back, and I found out more about the drumming circle, and I committed to coming to the drumming circle the next day. And when I came to the drumming circle, the instructor, Midge, she welcomed me with open arms. She was like an auntie to me, and she started teaching me the old songs from my people, traditional songs that I had forgotten. So when you go do a substantial amount of time in prison, even though you're sweating with different brothers, you're learning different songs from them. As those songs are passed on from inmate to inmate, prisoner to prisoner, convict to convict, they change a little bit. So what originally starts out as a traditional song becomes something completely different within the prison system. So coming out here and working with Mitch was like learning these things all over again. Now, about a week into my stay at the McAllister Institute, my wife decided that she had enough of the life I was living and bouncing in and out of programs and jails and prisons. She didn't want it anymore. She left. And I remember thinking that if it had to happen, this was probably the best place for it to happen. In a program where I'm safe, in a place where I can come and I can work with these feelings, bring them to the talking circle, send them up to grandfather. And I've been coming here ever since. And 90 days has passed, and it went by quickly. And next week I graduate from the program. And when I first came over here, I remember feeling like I was just free falling, like I had been unplugged from a life support system out in Sonoma County. But what I found over the past 90 days is that my support system, my family is right here with the Intertribal Council, and it's been a blessing. Without the help of Sal Garcia and Charlie Toledo, Rick Poe, and some other people that have been instrumental, I don't know that I would have made it this far. I think I probably would have ended up back in prison doing a life sentence. So they bring me back to the drum. They bring me back to the sweat lodge ceremonies. They bring me back to more traditional ways. And a lot of, like I said earlier, a lot of people think that the Indian ways died out a long time ago, but they didn't. They haven't. They're alive and they're well in here in this particular place. And there's nothing to me that feels better than sitting with my own people, talking about cultural things, talking about things that they understand. Whereas outside there, they're not easily understood. And sometimes I don't want to explain these things to other people, the culture, the spirituality. I just want to talk about it with people that understand. So that's what I have here. And it's something that's worth protecting, it's something that's worth striving for and holding together. And my future is looking pretty bright. And next week I start work at another rehab, which is a dream job come true. Doing more promotions with the book. I have stronger relationships in my life. I have people I can count on. I have people that'll worry about me if I disappeared. People that don't criticize, they don't judge me. Whatever I bring to the table, they help me work with it. These are things I've never had before. And the irony is these are things that have always existed. They've always existed in little pockets of the Native community, but I was so out there on drugs and alcohol and confusion and anger and madness that I couldn't find those little pockets. But when I decided to put the bottle down, put the drugs down, I started seeing more clearly and I was able to find these things. And so it's been a long journey, but I'm finally home.